and welcome to the How Not to Screw Up Your Kids, the bucket releasing episodes. I'm your host, Dr Maryhan, parenting expert, psychologist, and author of How Not to Screw Up Your Kids, a real-life guide to parenting book. So, one of the major contributors of filling our bucket is conflict and challenges around different parenting styles with our partners. Now, there's often that can also happen with other people who are involved in looking after our children, whether that's grandparents, our parents, or our partner's parents. I'm not going to necessarily address that directly. I really want to talk about partners specifically. And this can be, let's be honest, it can be partners where we're co-parenting in the same home, but it can also be partners where we're co-parenting, where we are parenting and we live separately. So I want to start specifically with co-parenting when we live in the same home, because I think that's probably a straightforward way to go about it. And then we'll then add, what do you do if you're co-parenting, but you're now co-parenting apart? Because I think that creates a whole different dynamic, but they're all huge contributors to what fills our bucket. So let's just sort of look at this broadly in terms of context. We all have different parenting styles. We have we have natural go-tos when it comes to parenting. Doesn't mean we only parent in one way, but we have a particular preference, something that just feels more comfortable to us. And that parenting preference will come from our own experiences of being parented. So it may well be that we parent in a way that's very similar to our parents. We think that, we came out all right and there was no issue there. And so we believe that actually that's how I want to parent. It may be that we parent in a direct opposite way to our parents. We feel that our parents pretty much screwed us up. And so we are absolutely not going to repeat that pattern of parenting. Or it could be that we have a bit of an eclectic mix of the two. We just have to remember that the way that we parent comes from our own experiences. There is no such thing as having a right parenting style or a wrong parenting style. It's just being aware of your parenting style, and that some parenting styles are really great in some situations and some parenting styles don't work quite as well. So that we can then become self-aware. Knowledge is power, isn't it? It's this idea, if we understand about ourselves, then it makes things easier. And we will be sharing with this episode a parenting styles questionnaire, which will just help you understand. And it's a really great way to start a conversation with your partner around the differences in parenting styles. And often what I see when I'm working with families or I'm giving talks and parents sort of pull me to one side afterwards to have a conversation is that where the conflict often happens is where your parenting styles are, your natural go-to parenting styles are very different, and you are having a particular challenge with a particular child where you're both approaching it, feels like from polar opposite ends. So I do believe that the first starting point is this perspective of knowledge, and the first starting point has got to be approaching things not from the perspective of, I know I'm doing it the right way, you're not, you need to listen to me. It may well be that your approach is one based on some really good sound psychological advice. It might be based on some advice that I've given and your partner is not taking that advice and is finding it difficult to implement. But we're not going to help them or persuade them to kind of reflect and look at a different perspective if we come at it from this perspective of, I know and you're doing it wrong. Because, I've often talked about this idea about talking to our children at a much more adult to adult level. The same applies to us with our partner. If we come in at this sort of like, I know what I'm doing, I've read the books, you're not listening, you don't know what you're doing, you're screwing the kids up by the way that you're approaching it. What we tend to do is we come from this authoritarian adult perspective that then brings out either the child in our partner, and so they feel they withdraw and they feel submissive and they're not able to contribute, or you then get this equal and opposite headbutting that is then not helpful to anyone. So I think what we need to approach it on the basis, and using my very favourite words of, I've noticed that we both seem to be approaching Jack's difficulties falling asleep at night in a really different, in opposite ways. And I don't think it's really helpful that we're not together and we're not approaching it in a unified way, because I think what then happens is Jack gets some mixed messages, and I know that I'm really guilty of sort of acting slightly autonomously and not really having that discussion. I think we have to approach these things from a magnanimous, just being honest that, I might not be doing this the right way in terms of how I'm approaching the conversation with you, and that consistency. And what can often happen is we can feel a parent who is the one that, maybe if we're having a sleep routine issue, maybe the one that is always doing the bedtime, or feels like they're doing the bedtime most often, or seems to get triggered by the challenges at bedtime more often. So they feel that they've naturally been made the more invested party in that particular situation. So they feel like they're the ones that are having to make the decisions, and they want the other partner to then get on board and then to be doing the same thing. Whereas actually what we need to be doing is taking a bit of a step back and just being honest. I've gone off and I've been doing this, and I've assumed that you understand why I'm doing it and that we're going to do it together. But this inconsistency is not helping. It's not helping our relationship. It's not helping us deal with a particular situation with our child. Should we have a conversation about it? Tonight might not be the best time, because I know that you've come back and you're exhausted, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that I know that this isn't working, and I just think it's really important that we have a conversation. So it's trying to approach it on that way. So that's kind of the input. That's kind of the first point, which is why I think, one of the other episodes that we've done covering the other bucket emptying hack of the Sunday planning meeting is that if you've scheduled regular check-ins, you can avoid issues like this building up and creating a whole host of resentment. So it's really being able to try and approach it from this, like, we're in this together and we're really not being consistent in the messaging. Can we just sort of think about how, the reason why I'm doing it this way is because I'd read this and I've worked on the basis that Jack's behaving the way that he's doing because of that. So I felt that actually trying to respond in that way would be really helpful. I know that the way that you're approaching it is this way. Talk to me about why you've been doing that and why you think that's a good thing, and maybe we can find something that feels like it's a good fit for both of us. So it's approaching it on that basis, but also recognizing that your parenting styles your natural parenting styles will lend themselves to you taking on slightly different roles within that particular problematic situation. It may well be you have a particular strength and a natural tendencies around empathy and an acknowledgement of emotion, and your partner might be really good at being firm around boundaries and being consistent in applying those boundaries. And so actually you can work together. It's, this is my strength and I really struggle with this a bit more. This is your strength, but you struggle with this. How can we work together to give Jack that consistent approach? So I think that's really helpful, but I think it's also helpful if we have a starting point of having completed our parenting styles questionnaire. So we'll be sharing that one specifically with you. What happens when we're co-parenting but we no longer live together? I think a lot of that depends on the kind of relationship that you have got. If you've got a relationship where you're able to prioritize the needs of the children and you're able to have a conversation, then I think that that's great. So you can approach it in pretty much the same way. I think, and sadly, this seems to be a common situation where you're co-parenting, but actually the relationship that you have with your children's other parent has broken down, so you can't have those conversations. And I think in those scenarios, you have to just simply adopt an approach of, this is the way that we do things in this home. And I know that you will do things differently in your other parent's home, and that's okay. And for us to exercise a certain element of respect and acknowledgement for the differences and the way that they do their parenting styles, it is not helpful to be critical of their parenting style, to make derisory comments. I know it's difficult when that split has been particularly fractious and it's just not helpful. But what we want to do, remember, children are much more likely to do what they see than what we say, is we want to model this. I'm interested in what I'm doing as your parent in my home, and I'm respectful that might be different in another home, and that's not for me to comment on. And really trying to stay focused in on that when you're dealing with it, rather than finding yourself getting sucked into being critical, because children see through this and it really is unhelpful. They then end up feeling they're kind of caught in the middle. But that's a whole other episode which we can do in terms of a hack for emptying our bucket that way. So I hope you have found that episode helpful. please head over to the drmaryhan.com/library, where you'll be able to get hold of the free resource, which is the Parenting Styles Questionnaire. I suggest you do it and your partner so that you can discuss. Remember, there's no right parenting style. It's just the way that we tend to default to our go-to. If you just pop in your email address, you'll get instant access to the Parenting Styles Questionnaire and then all the other free resources across all my other podcast episodes. As ever, if you have enjoyed this episode, I would be so grateful, so eternally grateful, if you could rate, review and follow this podcast. Others can find us and we can spread the love. So, until next time.